like this, man. He's like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down in the forest, man. They're gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, see, like, you don't even know, man. It's like you're born into this world, man. And you got it's like that, man. The dust and wind, man. Or like the dang old candle, man. It don't matter, man. It's all the time.
All right, Librarian of Celaeno, welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing, man?
Good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. I've been an avid reader of your Substack for quite some time. I was joking before we went started that the first essay of yours I found was how to stop shooting each other, which is a ton of fun. I mean, it's obviously a serious subject matter, but it's a funny essay nonetheless. So I'm glad to have you on, man.
Well, thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm curious. Obviously, I'm familiar with your work, but some of my audience might not be. So, in broad strokes, who are you and what do you do?
So by day, I'm a school teacher. I teach at a high school in the South. And I just enjoy so many different aspects of intellectual life and popular culture and just society generally. I just feel the need to write about everything. Hence the moniker, the name, the nom de plume, Librarian of Celaeno. I was always intrigued by this idea. August Derleth wrote about this haunted library in deep space in the Taurus constellation around the Celaeno star, and I was like, oh, that's a good idea. I'd love to be the librarian of a haunted space library, this cosmic library with this repository of human knowledge. And so I decided that my Substack was going to be, I'm not the expert on everything or anything in particular. I'm not someone who's the best guy on Ukraine or the best guy on schools or whatever. A lot of people have more data-driven, more focused stuff. But I always told myself I was going to write about more than anybody else. I was going to write about a wider range of topics than anybody else. That's always kind of been my goal.
Well, that's sort of an interesting point about being a generalist, right? When we look at an actually liberal education, not like a liberal arts degree, right? But it was, an understanding of most subjects fairly well, right? And from that, you could branch out later in life on your own. But the purpose of an education was to ensure you were well-rounded enough to find something you were good at, right? And you even see this, I can't remember who was writing about it. Someone wrote about it somewhere, which is a very helpful citation, right? Talking about the move away from, it's kind of pejoratively referred to as rote memorization in education.
Yeah.
And, that's been going on for quite some time, but it is sort of an interesting thing that you need to have a base of facts to form opinions about almost anything. And, one of the marks of an interesting or highly educated person, although those are two separate circles on a Venn diagram, at least largely speaking, is that they are conversant in a series of different topics. And so, yeah, it's definitely what I've enjoyed about your work.
Yeah, the whole rote memorization is bad thing. I can remember a long time ago, I was in ed school training to be a teacher. And by the way, don't ever do that. It's an awful waste of time. And I was in ed school, and one of the professors, the teaching assistants, was telling us how kids didn't need to memorize stuff, and we shouldn't be measuring that, and we should be just focusing on whether they have critical thinking skills. And so I said, well, what are they supposed to think about? And what shouldn't they know something before they do that? And her response was, I'll never forget, if you're talking about factual information, they can just Google that. This is a person training teachers. And I always thought, the whole rote memorization isn't what education is. It's true, but it's kind of like saying basketball isn't dribbling. Yeah, that's not all of it, but if you can't do that, you can't do anything else. And the whole idea that, rote memorization is a bad way to teach people. And I mean, you look at the people who learned the old bad way and what they could do, and you look at the kind of people we're churning out now, I would say there's no comparison.
Well, and that's what makes education so irritating as an outsider looking in, right? I just due to, family members have a slightly more of an insight than, shall we say, like the average Joe, but it's never been my vocation, is the incredible presentism of education, which is everything before exactly this moment was a horrible disaster, and this new program or plan will save us. Do not pay attention to the decades of data, either official or anecdotal, that shows that education in America has been largely an unmitigated failure, just for generations at this point.
So it's kind of this confluence of two negative forces in American life. There's sort of the progressive influence, that's Dewey. And that's this idea that education is not about conveying information or handing on traditions or anything like that. Education is about developing a kind of adaptive mindset. Society is changing so much that knowledge isn't fixed and nothing is permanent. And therefore, what you should develop is just this general kind of outlook where you learn new things quickly and to be socially useful. And then there's this sort of what is kind of laughably called a conservative view, which isn't conservative, it's just sort of corporate view, which is that if something isn't quantifiable and expressible economically, it's not really valuable. And so you'll have people on the one hand saying, we need to get rid of all these traditions and everything and just teach critical thinking. And then you get these other people on the other side who will say, no, we need to, have data-driven, business-focused, skills that pay the bills type of education. And both of them are just such incredibly impoverished views of human life. And if you go back past that, back past the early 1900s into when this classical education was still a going concern in wide parts of America, it's a totally different mindset. It's this idea there are timeless truths that need to be communicated, and that's what you build on, and that's your starting point basically for interacting with the world you live in, that you experience through your life. And we've lost so much of that. And some of it too is, America is a Protestant country, and we have a sort of religious world that reinvents itself every 50 years. And so education kind of does the same thing. It's bizarre when you look at the history of education, how many times the exact same fads have been tried. We need small classrooms. We need big classrooms. We need small groups. We need 50 people. And it's over and over again. It's the same things because nobody remembers.
It's an interesting thing. My grandparents are core baby boomers.
Mm-hmm.
And so when my grandfather, left the service, he did what many people did, right? Took his GI Bill, became a teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he had a very, very short stint in education. It was sort of a confluence of both kind of the teachers union, which had been taken over, and he would not use these words as a very good conservative, but by sort of militant black politics. Right. Mm-hmm. It was very, very heavily racialized.
Yeah.
And so he was effectively run out, right? Physically assaulted, his car vandalized. And so he said, okay, fine, whatever, I'll leave, which was, let's be honest, a good decision for everyone involved.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing talking to him is this would have been the late 60s and early 70s. And he was talking about a problem with the sort of, and when I say the professionalization of education, I mean something very specific there, right? But the track of sort of highly educated education administrators who will write a thesis, secure their degree, and then take that thesis into a school and say, well, guess what? I've got this grand new plan. And he described that as being very cyclical because, and look, this anecdote is quite literally 50 years out of date. So I assume it works differently. But at these kind of mid-level management jobs, someone would come out of school, they'd have a great plan, they would institute it, and then move on to another position, either, the same level somewhere else, or they'd be, promoted before they could see the consequences of their plan. They would be removed from accountability. And
that view is not out of date at all. In fact, that pretty much fairly characterizes every aspect, not only of education, but of public life, of the business world, of the military, of everything. You come in, you're the CEO of a company, you got to get shareholder value up, you got to make your money quick, and then you just move on to something else. When you're a college president, you come in. That's why every college in America it's just a giant construction zone. They're always building all these new buildings to show, hey, look at all the stuff I did. And they move on to something else. You're way past the days where like I wrote about Edith Hamilton, when she graduated, she had her master's degree in classics, and they asked her at the age of, I think, 23 to be the headmistress of this girls' high school. And she worked there for like 30 straight years from the time she was in her early 20s. And they considered it perfectly fine to be in your early 20s, be running a high school. And they put her in charge. She was there for like 30 years. She wasn't just in there to make a name for herself and move on and get promoted. It was a lifelong dedication. And education used to be this kind of mix of people a small core group of lifers, where they've just dedicated their lives to this. They've accepted they're going to be poor. They've accepted they're not going to get the recognition, all stuff like that, but they're just so dedicated to it, they do it. And then you've got other people who have other interests, have other passions in life, but they just spend a period of their life teaching. That was the norm for a very long time. A lot of Americans you wouldn't even expect, spent a short stint of their life teaching. Andrew Jackson was a teacher for like a year. Sam Houston was a teacher for a year. And it was just sort of more of a part. Young women, especially before they got married, would get a job as a teacher, and they'd work there for 2-3 years. They got married and they left the career behind. So the profession was enriched by people who were otherwise educated, but were going to do other things in their life, who would just spend a brief period of time teaching kids. And then they had more of an insight into just how kids in general thought, the education process. And it was sort of like the era where conscription was the norm, and everybody had some familiarity and at least 2 years of experience in the military or whatever, where they understood it more. Now, teaching profession and the military are highly professionalized. There's a small segment of the population that goes into them, and the rest of the public doesn't really know much about what they do directly.
Well, it's sort of a similar situation in each, right? Both education and the armed forces, where the ratio of, shall we say, like the effective organization, right? Like the part of the system that does its stated purpose, the ratio of that to the jobs program aspect is getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
And obviously there's always some level to that, right? There are a million stereotypes about, lazy union teachers or, fry cooks in the Navy, right? That has always existed for some time.
Yeah.
But one of the things that you wrote about, and I'm glad that you wrote about this because you're the only person I've seen ringing this alarm bell, because I've seen it firsthand, is the explosion of effectively therapists and psychologists in public education. And, just off the rip, you might look at that and say, well, sure, maybe there's a place for a mental health professional in a large institution, but effectively it is seen as an unalloyed good, right? You can never give too many resources to, the mental health of children. And so they keep hiring these people, in many places there are critical shortages of teachers, and the organization grows forever. The results continue to get worse, but there's always another therapist, right?
Yeah. It's the proliferation of it's another facet of managerialism. Managers don't think in terms of good and evil. They think in terms of quantification. They think in terms of empirical evidence, things like that. So problems that in another age, laziness, being unable to get along with people, just being dull, being unwilling to work, threatening people, stuff like that we would see as immoral, are now medicalized, because once you medicalize it, you can commodify it. There's a job associated with it. There's medication associated with it. There's all kinds of quantification associated with it. If you have any familiarity with special education, it's an absolute just tar pit where kids get sucked in, and there's just reams and reams and reams of paperwork generated on a daily basis about them. Everything has to be documented. Everything has to be quantified. All of this costs a fortune. It's insane, but that's kind of what the system wants. If you just tell somebody you're bad, that hurts people's feelings. If you tell somebody you have a psychological condition, all of a sudden now the system can do something with you, so you're kind of accepted. And that's basically where we are with everything. Whether you're talking about the military, the business world, the media, it's the same basic managerial consensus. And I think that's where we're kind of at a turning point in society. I think if anything, now we're kind of that whole system is kind of, and I've written about this in a lot of places. I think now you're really starting to see that system get challenged.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you bring that up, because it sort of feels as if, we as a culture were kind of coasting on the fumes of something that still worked.
Yeah.
And it was formally gone, right? We had made it clear that the pre-existing order was, horrible and racist and unacceptable and needed to be done away with.
Mm.
But we still had the vestiges of that culture, right? There were, even in many cases, the revolutionaries themselves had been raised under those values. This is very much what you see with the baby boomer generation, right? They're sort of the stereotype of, the kid who went to Woodstock and then 30 years later, he's got a white picket fence and a nuclear family.
Yeah.
It's painting with a broad brush, but there is something to that. Whereas their descendants, either ideologically or lineally, did not have that kind of firm, grounding. And I think it's sort of an interesting thing. And I've seen this in many institutions where you have, and we'll just use baby boomers because they're a convenient straw horse to beat up on.
Yeah.
It's a favorite hobby of mine, right? Where they don't really have an argument against the sort of the religion of social progress, but they have an instinctual desire to have things run correctly. Yet when they are replaced, when they get too old, when they retire, the people underneath them are sort of bought in hook, line, and sinker to ideological positions which were only ever sort of half believed or half kind of put into effect. And again, there's what was at one point a very prestigious public high school near me, and it was even in a small and not particularly prosperous town. Through the kind of Rust Belt years, was nationally recognized, and largely because of a singular individual who, like you said, was a lifer, right? Someone who had devoted himself to that craft. And when he retired, he was replaced with sort of a Jasmine Crockett type.
Yeah.
You understand what I mean?
Sounds about right.
The institution went with it.
Yeah. That's kind of the boomers, they did a lot of deconstructing. It's important not to take away from them, though, that they did work hard and they were creative and they did build a lot of things. The problem was they didn't realize how dependent they were on that inheritance that they kind of scorned. They made use of it. It was a part of their lives. But their biggest flaw, I think, is not that they destroyed it or rejected it or critiqued it. It's that they didn't pass it down in turn. You look at Star Wars. I mean, talking about my Jedi Brain essay and stuff about Star Wars and stuff. A guy like George Lucas, the guy who invented Star Wars, this is a guy who grew up on the Iliad and the Odyssey and Flash Gordon and samurai movies and all kinds of other things. He had this tremendous cultural inheritance. And you compare him to the people who make the new Star Wars movies, and the only influence they have are old Star Wars movies. All they can do is deconstruct. They can't create. They don't have that inheritance. They don't have that background where they can create something new. All they can do is look at old Star Wars and say, this is racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever, and try to shoehorn this stuff in. And they don't even see why it doesn't work. They don't understand why it doesn't appeal to people. Because for them, they're checking all the right boxes. Here's the things people like. We put it all in there. What's the problem? I mean, apart from the fact people don't actually like it, it's not art. It's a product.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing. I think I have, at this point, and it was a years-long process, successfully emotionally divorced myself from any sort of pop culture franchise ever. Yeah. Because after a certain point, it's like, well, this is just horribly depressing. So I'll start caring about things that nobody else cares about. Like, just Gene Wolfe or something, which if they manage to make that into a movie, God bless them. But point is, I think that you're speaking to something interesting there, right? Which is the difference between, an original creator and a fan.
Yeah.
And this is not the entirety of it, but you see this even in like any one of the kind of like large legacy male hobbies, right? Whether it's, Dungeons and Dragons, Warhammer, Star Wars, whatever, pick your poison, where the original creators, Warhammer's a good example, were fairly well-read history nerds.
Yeah.
And so they'd pick and choose from motifs from all over the world, things they like, they jammed them together and they made something that was kind of, interesting and at least to a certain degree unique. Although I believe Michael Moorcock would probably dispute that. Either way, right?
Yeah.
Whereas you take that to a second generation and you're sort of making a photocopy of a photocopy. It's like the Ouroboros eating its own tail.
Yeah.
And
Budryard, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It collapses in on itself. And that same dynamic, right, of sort of being, given sort of cultural incest, right? Something with just eternally looping in on itself. Weirdly enough, is something you see in all aspects of politics. Like protest culture, for example. Protests now, and look, it's a large degree of it that it is the exact same people who've been protesting since the 60s, at least at the No Kings rallies. But it adopts the same motifs of the 1960s. We're sort of hearing an echo of an echo of an echo. Yeah. Right? Okay, it bounces once into, the anti-nuclear movement. It bounces again into like the anti-WTO, then through Wall Street, George Floyd, and back to now. And it's like, this is, it is like whatever the last Star Wars movie is, where it's like, it's been copied so many times, there's almost nothing to it.
Yeah.
And to sort of connect it to your point about, your Jedi Brain essay, which was quite good. You even see that in the artificial moral lens placed upon international politics.
Yeah.
Right. So the justification for America as an empire is our defeat of, shall we say, a expansionist Austrian painter. Right?
Yeah.
We did it. We defeated Satan. And that is invoked as moral justification for the Cold War, for Slobodan Milosevic, for, Hussein. And to the point where we've got Putler and it sort of rings hollow. But I'll throw it back to you if you could just give us, kind of the thesis for this Jedi Brain essay and, perhaps why you chose to write it.
Well, kind of take a step back and kind of address something you said there a little bit too about the kind of cultural exhaustion. I remember they came out with a Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland movie some years back. And the writer, they were interviewing him, I forget who it was, and he was saying how the Alice I'm going to show you here is not going to be a typical Victorian girl. She's breaking all the rules and she's not going to just conform. And I was thinking to myself, kind of like with the Hitler stuff, this has no cultural relevance. There are no girls alive who even remember the legacy of like Victorian sexual mores or anything like that. No one has grown up with these. It's nobody's even going to understand what she's rebelling against. It's not a reality to them. We're so far past that. It's been so deconstructed and so destroyed. We don't have any kind of emotional connection to it. And that's kind of what you see. So with Jedi Brain, right? So war in Ukraine starts, and this is, I get into the nuts and bolts of the whole background to the conflict. It's much more complex than Americans like to think. This has been going on arguably since the days of the Russian Empire, this tension between Ukraine and Russia in terms of its unique identity versus part of being a wider part of Russian culture and all this stuff. This goes back a long ways. And of course, then there's the Soviet era administrative divisions that parked a whole bunch of Russian people in Ukraine. And then there's leading up to 2014, the coup that America was involved in that overthrew the government of Ukraine and replaced them with, kind of a NATO puppet instead of a Russian puppet, and the fallout from all that. So all this is happening before February of 2022 when Putin invades. And because we Americans are so divorced from history and tradition and any kind of intellectual or moral framework to understand this, our leaders just feed us these same lazy tropes over and over again. Putin's Hitler. Putin's Hitler, just like Saddam Hussein was Hitler and Milosevic was Hitler. And also, not only is he Hitler, he's also Darth Vader and he's Voldemort. He's every other bad guy, right? They're all just the same thing. There's no distinction. There's no understanding of a difference between fictional evil and real evil. And I think for a lot of these people, I didn't get super into this in the essay, but Hitler is almost kind of a fictional character for them. I mean, there's a real historical Hitler who did things, but the Hitler they're pitching to us is just this all-purpose dark lord who doesn't have a fixed ideology. He's not a German nationalist looking to overturn the Treaty of Versailles. He's divorced from his historical context, and he's just anyone who wants to be bad to anybody else. That's Hitler.
Well, to go back to Baudrillard, right? And this is a statement I'm sure will be clipped out of context, but there is almost a sense that World War II never happened.
Yeah.
Right. That obviously there's a literal event that did.
Yeah.
But the kind of like chimera of different kind of emotional stings put together that is the popular conception is entirely a media creation. But sorry, I'll throw it back to you.
No, that's true. I mean, there's World War II is no longer remembered. So pretty much everybody who fought in it is now deceased. That wasn't true when I was a child, but it's true now. So the memory of World War II is gone. And what you have left is this sort of mediated reality where the complexities of the largest global conflict in history are just kind of sidelined in favor of this very simple and very serviceable narrative. If you look at popular media, post World War II, it's really hard to find. I was thinking about this the other day. It's hard to find stuff from before World War II where there's this sort of like dark lord bent on world conquest bad guy. There's nothing like that in classical literature, nothing like that in medieval literature, nothing really like that in 19th century literature that I'm aware of. That whole idea of evil, dark, all-powerful guy trying to take over the world that's really modern. And it dates right to that post-war period. And that's sort of a legacy, a cultural legacy of the war. And at the same time, it influences our politics, it influences our entertainment. And they're not really distinct things. I talk about this in when I wrote about the Iron Sheik and wrestling, they kind of all flow together. They're not really distinct, entertainment and politics. And because they're both mediated realities.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that, I mean, I guess you could say the closest, and this is 20th century as well, is the British propaganda in World War I, right? The rape of Belgium and, the Kaiser. But even then, let's be honest, those are very closely tied. That's not, a huge distinction really.
Yeah. I mean, and even then they're not saying the Kaiser is trying to take over the world. He's just kind of a problem. He's making it hard to be British, basically. But there's not this idea that, the Kaiser, he's bad because he's foreign, but he's not really like inherently this like threat to humanity or something. He's just sort of
the Kaiser doesn't hate us for our freedom.
Yeah. And that's, Saddam Hussein or Osama bin Laden, just like Hitler, hates our freedom. It's losing its value, and in terms of, and nothing new is coming up to replace it. There's no new Hitler, and you beat the Hitler brush for 80 years. At this point, it loses its impact, and I think that's kind of one of the problems that people are having with Ukraine. I mean, if the Russian invasion of Ukraine had taken place in 2004 or something like that, we'd be at war with them, no doubt, because there's still, I think, that cultural legacy of this guy's Hitler, we need to do something, would still have a lot of power. If George W. Bush was president, we'd be at war with Russia. Now it's impossible. There's absolutely no political constituency for this. People will pull out polls saying, look, America supports Ukraine. They support giving them money, giving them stuff under limited circumstances. Absolutely no one at all wants to go to war with Russia over this. They understand the implications of it. So there's not really anything that's replaced Hitler.
Well, and it sort of is, and this is really the fault of kind of two concurrent waves of leftist thought, right? You have, and Gottfried writes about this, right? The fanatical anti-fascism of the FDR regime.
Mhm.
And let's be honest, we still live in the crumbling husk of FDR's world,
Yeah.
right? All of our institutions are, in many cases, find their way back to him. So that's a part of it. But similarly, the ruling, the political formula of our elite, right, on both an international and domestic level, effectively, it has a positive and negative side. And the negative side is perhaps best expressed by Joe Biden, right? Who infamously said they want to put y'all back in chains. Much to his chagrin. I think he was roundly mocked for that. But point is, right, that's the, support us, or, you go back to, the bad old world of little Hitlers everywhere. Right?
Yeah.
And then, the affirmative is basically, well, we protected you from that. And because of that, we are this global force for good. That language is sort of out of date, but it's still there.
Yeah.
And in a weird way, and this has been very funny to watch, the absolute chimp out from our elites when people consciously reject that proposition is very, very funny to me. Because it's sort of like the aging starlet, right? Who's not used to having men tell her no.
Yeah.
And she's deep in denial about that. And that is sort of the position I see our elites in, right? Where it's like, well, why would another country want to be anything other than our vassal? Or why would, a people group want to be anything other than, another progressive client group? It's sort of, if I didn't live in this society, it would certainly be funnier, but I don't really feel sympathy for them.
Yeah, it's a lot of it has to do with the fact that, if you look at politicians, it's like boomers and millennials. There's no Gen X people hardly. A few. I think Ron DeSantis might count as Gen X. I think he's the same age as me, and I consider myself Gen X. I'm born in '79.
You have don't you have Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, some of the best and brightest?
Ted Cruz was born. When was he born? I want to say he's a boomer. I think he was born before 65. Don't quote me on that, though. I could be wrong.
So I'm going to check this out.
Fact
he was
checker.
born in 1970, and that is more an indictment of how he is aged than anything else.
I don't want to be mean to Ted Cruz. Okay, Ted Cruz is technically Gen X, but I mean, he's not like, you think about people hold power. Like who's prominent? Right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the exceptions prove the rule.
Yeah, you got fossils. You got Nancy Pelosi. You got the corpse of Mitch McConnell. You got burnt people. Joe Biden doesn't even count as a boomer. He's older than them. He's 43. He's too old to be a boomer. You got them, and then you got millennials. You got JD Vance. You got AOC. You got Matt Gage. You got all these people like that. And there's this kind of gap, and you can see it generationally, where the boomers, Lindsey Graham and company, are sitting there. We need to go to war against Ukraine. He's Hitler. He's Hitler. He's Hitler. And none of the millennials want that. It just doesn't appeal to them. That story, like you're talking about, that idea that American empire is a good thing. These guys grew up in an era when, that was awesome. It was great for America to have this American empire. We had this huge manufacturing base. We had all this stuff like that. Then they sold it. And a lot of people now are saying, well, we're paying all this money. We're sending soldiers off to die. Young men from the South, where I'm from, are disproportionately out there dying. And the trade-off is not really paying off. We're not getting anything from this at all. The boomers had this prosperous world that they got from the American empire, but the American empire is not paying dividends anymore. And you look at a guy like JD Vance. JD Vance has absolutely no interest whatsoever in having anything to do with Ukraine. If boomer Donald Trump wasn't in charge, it would. If he becomes president, it's done. He's going to pull up the next day. No more money. No more nothing. What's the point of this? To the horror of whatever boomers are still drawing oxygen through masks and being mad about it. And that's what it is, really. It's a generational thing. There was no handoff. There's no tradition of these sentiments being carried on.
Well, and it similarly produced sort of a crisis of identity on the left.
Yeah.
They have split in a similar way that the right has split. Weirdly enough, over the Israel-Palestine issue.
Yeah.
But in addition, there's another level to it as well, which is so much of kind of the second wave of leftism, that really reshaped America post World War II, was the so-called New Left, right?
Yeah.
Which was effectively existed in opposition to Pat Buchanan's childhood, right? The sort of like idyllic 1950s America.
Yeah.
And look, like, I'm glad Pat Buchanan is still around, but I believe he is 95.
Yeah.
So they are effectively tilting at the distant memories of, at best, octogenarians.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas, you bring that same sort of cultural critique, and look, like when I was in college, I was effectively required to speak in that voice.
Yeah.
But it was completely fake, right? That's not how I grew up. That's not what I experienced. That's how my grandparents grew up.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm being forced to do, sort of this cultural critique. And so, in the same way that, pop culture has experienced this sort of ossification, the same thing has happened to the left, right? They're sort of stuck in a very much a previous era. And it is kind of funny to watch them wrestle through that. It's not entirely sure what the next form is going to be. It seems like the woke stuff is certainly not dead, but nowhere near as culturally prominent. Maybe it's just, third world, quote unquote, socialists, right? Like whoever that Mamdani fellow is, Sadiq Khan would be another option. So I don't know. It is sort of a moment of sort of running out, right? That same cultural dissipation that, you pointed out has hit everyone all at once.
It's the right, and I don't mean conservatives. I mean an actual authentic right, the right that is coming into being in America. We never really had one before. Even Pat Buchanan, is a paleo conservative. He's still a conservative. If you scratch deep enough on Pat Buchanan, you're still going to hit that level of liberalism. Liberalism is good. It's our particular cultural inheritance coming from the British and stuff like that. But liberalism's still our thing. It's not until you're divorced from that idea of, we're British. We have a cultural connection to Western Europe. Western Europe is our norm and everything. When that's beat out of you, all of a sudden, so too does any kind of real reverence for liberalism, even in that sense. So the new right is extremely critical of liberalism, whereas I would say the left has been consumed by it. Woke, to me, and everybody defines woke differently. Hananiah, I'm not like a fan of his, but he wrote an essay about woke. It was pretty good. The idea of woke as being this sort of, and other people have written about it too. The idea of woke as kind of a social signal, as a way to distinguish yourself from like the sweaty masses. It's basically, I have opinions that only someone at a certain level of society could actually live with. Manami is basically that. There's nothing actually leftist about him. He's not a revolutionary. He's not going to overthrow the system or change the system. His whole pitch is basically entrenching people like him in power as the distributors of spoils, and the system will be turned against the enemies of those people with laptop jobs and all this stuff. It's a boutique political philosophy that appeals to very particular people at certain levels of the managerial system, and that's key. Managerialism can't accommodate rightism, because rightism is rooted in something transcendent. It's rooted in something beyond the system. Leftism just is a system. It's a closed material loop of how goods are produced, distributed, all that. And that's all it is. And so what you're seeing now, the future is going to be this contest between the sort of progressivized managerialism, where capitalism is state capitalism. It's under the control of progressives. That's what Mandami kind of represents. And then you have this rightism, which is, we need to look at the fundamental structures of liberalism, liberal assumptions about anthropology, liberal assumptions about religion, liberal assumptions about economics, all these things about humans as these sort of atomized individual rational actors in this indifferent universe. And we got to reassess that. To me, that's why the right is so much more interesting than the left, because the right represents an actual kind of revolutionary force, whereas the left is just sort of, about getting a job.
Well, and there's another level, which is the left they are so completely and totally owned by power.
Yeah.
That, they sort of get to they get to have their time in the playground, right? They get to play Revolution whenever it's convenient. But look, when Biden comes in, Antifa goes away, right? They don't actually get to do anything real.
Yeah.
And it sort of is an interesting dynamic there, right? That they are.
You look at this lady. You look at this lady like Rufo. I forgot her name. St. Felix, I think. This lady that writes for the New Yorker, and she had like all these anti-white articles she had written in tweets and stuff like that had come out, and he, blasted her and put her on blast on Twitter and got this whole controversy and stuff like that. But I mean, in a sense, like what you're saying, the left. Leftism is a social signal. It's, I believe in these boutique things. Actual serious leftists, they're like the court jesters of liberalism. They're the court jesters of the managerial state. She gets up, does her little angry dance, white, you white people, and they just laugh. It's just funny, and it's this tension. It's like French aristocrats inviting in Rousseau to tell them they're all decadent and they're going to, be destroyed by the natural, class of the country and stuff. And it's that kind of thing. It's people who are so decadent and so feel so secure in their power that they can foist people like this up and pretend to take them seriously.
Yeah, well, that's a valid point there, right? And there's I can't remember the name of it. I was talking with some people in our sphere, and they were mentioning that, weirdly enough, the black communists have picked up on this as well.
Oh yeah,
right. Where they basically realize that woke is, I can't remember what they call it. They have a delightfully Marxist name for it. Something like it's not supposed capitalism, but it's something quite like that, right? Where it's the idea that by like entering into the woke game, you are
symbolic capitalism.
Symbolic capitalism.
Yeah,
Thank you. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Which I'm not a Marxist, but there are some turns of phrase that are so Marxist, right?
Yeah.
That you're just like, no one else could have come up with this except for you. But point is, right, the idea that, by engaging in that, you are commodifying yourself and your identity to achieve greater economic benefit, right? That you were sort of playing into the system. And look, their solution to that is entirely incorrect, but that analysis is spot on. And have you ever read The System's Greatest Trick by Kaczynski?
Oh, Ted Kaczynski?
Mm-hmm.
I want to say yes.
It's short, right? It's like a 30-page essay, but it's quite good. And he is cautioning his followers who at the time, right, he was in Supermax for, shall we say, his extracurricular activities.
ADX Florence,
Yeah. He was warning his then quite left-wing, quite anarchist audience against the dangers of sort of allowing their instinct for rebellion to be, sort of funneled back into the regime. Mm-hmm. I share neither the desired end goal of Ted Kaczynski or the people who like him, but this analysis is correct either way. And he talks about how, so many of these things, right? They provide sort of a treadmill, a release valve, and in some cases actually increase the efficiency of the system. Absolutely. So your instinct to break it apart is making it better. You're sort of functioning, and creating this like evolved, like super predator. And that's sort of something I see on the left, less so now that they're by and large completely incompetent, but they are kind of the ultimate spoiled children. Right. Yeah. They are sort of like they are driving around in the, the shopping cart with the spaceship on it, and they've got the wheel and they think they're driving. And again, I feel no sympathy for them, but it is sort of funny to watch.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about woke is about politics as consumer identity. It's about you as an individual, which right against leftism. Leftism is about collectivism, But you as an individual constructing an ever more esoteric boutique identity, one that will allow you to move up in this very narrow, very competitive social hierarchy. To me, woke really begins in the media. Woke begins with the basic fact that the media in America is collapsing. Jobs are disappearing at enormous rates. Competition for them, especially in places like New York and Washington, D.C., our competition is enormously difficult and much more fierce. And so the way you clear out the old generation of boomers is you call them out on their isms and phobias. And once the original, batch is out, once the actual sexist, racist, homophobes, whatever are out, now you have to find ever more nuanced things wrong with them. Microaggressions. You didn't respect my pronouns. You misgendered me and stuff like that. Where it's this constant status game where the new people with the cool new words are displacing the older people who still believe in that old school leftism and progressivism and liberalism and stuff. It is a managerial strategy. It is a way to negotiate and set yourself up and demonstrate your status. It has very little to do with leftism as any kind of broad popular movement. No one woke cares about actual poor people as poor people. They'll signal some kind of unity with them based on some characteristic other than the fact that they're poor, because of course they don't want to signal that they're poor. If I see a poor black guy, I don't like him because he's poor. I like him because he's black like me. And I identify with him because my identifying with him as a victim allows me to be a victim. And then I'm a victim of the system. I can get rid of the people victimizing me who, are above me in the hierarchy. It's all it's careerism nakedly, And
it's sort of in both the Mamdani and the example of woke, people always in sort of a previous era would screech about Donald Trump violating democratic norms.
Yeah.
Right. Which were sort of the unspoken rules of the game. And look, it's true. Those norms do exist. And in a functioning society, there are things that are considered generally off limits, right? Mm-hmm. That aren't explicitly written down, but you just don't do it. And, that enables things from escalating too quickly, right? Mm-hmm. It's sort of a ritualized version of, political combat, if you will.
Yeah.
Right. And people incorrectly look at Trump and blame him for that, instead of seeing him as a reaction to the disintegration of those norms.
Yeah.
And you could look at Trump and say, well, he has accelerated that process. Okay, that's true. But the problem is, if you're in a two-party system, if you're in a two-body system, right? Well, mm-hmm. if one is, playing the game at 100% intensity and you're playing at 150%, right? Well above beyond what everyone decided was the acceptable rules. Well, there's only two ways that resolves. Either, one party dominates, it becomes a one-party state, which is, sort of unlikely to happen for, a number of reasons while we have at least some, technical levels of democracy. Or the other party is going to say, well, I'm going to meet your bet, right? Like I'm going to match what you've put down. And obviously, that does create an acceleration, all right? Where sort of one side, increases over the other. And again, at the same time that the kind of cultural touchstones have weakened, the kind of cultural consensus around what is not to be done, right? What is considered inappropriate has completely and totally shattered. And a large part of that was that the left has spent 80 years deconstructing it, right? But nonetheless, right, the vestiges of that sort of, I guess, unwritten rules are fully and truly dead. And one of the reasons I find the sort of, anti-Trump Republicans to be genuinely kind of like the stupidest genetic dead end in politics, right?
Yeah.
The kind of like Lincoln types.
Oh, the North American Man-Boy Lincoln Association. Yeah.
Yeah. Or as someone infamously quipped, the log jamming Republicans.
Yeah.
But point is, right, is that and this is assuming they are legitimately and in good faith holding the values they proclaim, which I don't believe. But either way, right, is that, they are sort of missing that you cannot simply act as if that cultural consensus exists once it is gone.
Yeah.
Right. Once it's done, it's done. And simply the only rational choice is to operate, based on sort of the rules as they exist, not, what it says on the back of the box.
Yeah, I mean, the Never Trump people, it's basically, when movies came in, especially like, motion pictures with sounds, the talkies or whatever, vaudeville, the art form where people just performed on stage and sang and danced and stuff like that. People say, oh, the vaudeville's out. Movies are the new thing. But it didn't happen everywhere all at once. And there's still a lot of vaudeville acts that could still draw a crowd, provided they went to older people who liked the older stuff and just kept narrowly, refining their niche. And that's basically what Never Trump is. It's just a cash grab where they've got mailing lists of 70-year-olds who are just horrified that Donald Trump is violating our norm. These are all, old school Republicans from, like Maryland and Northern Virginia that, live in this kind of soft, squishy, purple world. There's nothing really conservative about them, but they're happy to send the Lincoln Project a whole bunch of money to write the same article over and over and over again. I've called it cringe stack. It's just these people that all they post every single week, every single time, stuff about Trump. They do not write about anything else. And there's Kinzinger, everything. Go to any essay, pick an essay of his at random, something here. I say essay, it's just fluff, but pick one of his AI generated, I'm assuming, fluff pieces and try to find one that doesn't contain multiple references to Donald Trump. There's nothing, they have nothing else to talk about. It's just a grift.
There's a very interesting economic analysis of the contribution of the Lincoln Republican types to the GDP, right? You could track a dollar as it goes from a truck stop bathroom to the rest of the economy.
Yeah.
I know what you mean. There's sort of a funny organization because, despite kind of putting on this sort of like Norman Rockwell, like American decency facade, they've been involved in some of the most sordid scandals. Again,
the guy who was in charge was this like chicken hawk who was talking to 14-year-olds on the like, this is Donald Trump's violating our norms. That's a norm for you? Or, I guess so. It probably is how they actually live. I don't know.
To quote a famous political philosopher, they're not sending their best.
No, they're sleazy, and the worst thing about them is just how boring they are. They are the political equivalent of Disney. They are churning out product. It's like that consumer meme. Don't ask questions, just consume product and get excited for it. It's like that, except it's about Donald Trump. Don't ask questions, just read our Trump essay.
Well, and Librarian, I'll ask you this question. Do you know literally anyone who has changed their opinion on Donald Trump in, I don't know, the last 10 years?
So I will say, yeah. So it's interesting. You look back at 2016 and you had sort of the normie-con right-wing adjacent type guys. I wouldn't even call them alt-light. It's guys like Matt Walsh, right? Matt Walsh, Charlie Kirk, people like that. Matt Walsh was saying horrible things about Donald Trump in 2016. I can't believe anybody would support this guy. He's evil. He's bad. You listen to him now, and he's on board. I haven't heard him say a word critical of Trump in forever. He talks about him fondly. Michael Knowles saying of the whole Daily Wire crew, and maybe, okay, it's a business decision, whatever. They've decided Trump is there to stay and they got to get on board. But I think honestly, a lot of these guys just look at him and say, he's not what we thought he was. We had ideas about what he was going to be, and he proved to be something different. And of course, you never really know with like Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is on the Trump train. Does he really like Donald Trump? It's hard to tell. But certainly I would say people are signaling that they've changed their minds. Some people are not and never will. National Review, they had the Never Trump issue and stuff. And pretty much everybody, Victor Davis Hanson, there you go. There's a guy, I think he was in that issue, didn't like Donald Trump. He's out. He's pro-Trump. So like those kind of, and I think that's a sign that things are really changing when it's not Twitter anons. It's not people like me who just identify as right wing. It's guys who are these sort of normicons with this broad popular audience who are signaling, I like Trump. I like this critique of liberalism. Matt Walsh coming out, he changed his mind about flag burning. It was a big deal. People put up his old tweets and he addressed it on his show. He said, in 2015 or whatever, I thought burning the flag was free speech. I was kind of a liberal. I've become way more right wing, and I think it's a bad idea. So you're starting to see people embrace these ideas that there's something beyond this sort of procedural liberalism, this transcendence that we need to embrace in politics.
Yeah, it's a valid point. I was perhaps over cynical on politics. Well, man, this has been a ton of fun. Time's flown by, and I didn't ask you really a single thing I meant to, which is always a good episodes, right? Where you get distracted talking about something else.
Totally fine. I'm glad it was a great conversation.
I appreciate it, man. If people want to find more of your work, what's a good way for them to do that?
Librarian of Celaeno at substack.com. I'm on there. Follow me. I'm on X. No, but I got like 500 followers on X. I'm not huge on X, but I'm also on X. Librarian of Celaeno. Look me up there. Follow me on X. I think they kind of, I got the blue check mark thing, but I think they kind of are throttling me because I link to Substack sometimes, and Elon Musk doesn't like that. So, but follow me and help me boost those numbers. That'd be great. And yeah.
Well, definitely. Both of those will be down in the description. Highly recommend the Substack. It is, you are easily on you're the Mount Rushmore of right-wing Substackers. You, Dave, Morgoth, a few others are must-reads. As someone who's been using Substack more, as a podcasting platform and for occasional articles, I've didn't realize how much my perception of Substack was highly biased by only reading very, very good essays. And if you spend any time on that app, you will read some of the dumbest thoughts ever put to paper by a human being.
I have people who comment on my stuff, and it makes me think a lot because it's so dumb. I don't know where they're even coming from. Like, I don't understand.
It becomes like archaeology at a certain point. You're trying to
why did you think this, and then I have to do research. Why are people posting stuff about Jewish volcano demon? What does that mean? And so I had to look up what that meant. And
I will say, your most recent interactions with the world's most autistic pagans was very, very funny.
These people, I swear they're
I don't know where they're making them. Is the thing.
And the thing is, I don't address. They come to me, and they'll write like this stupid comment, and then they get mad. They're like, I can't believe you're not treating me with respect. Like, you came on here and mocked my religion. I didn't say anything to you. No, I don't read you. Nobody reads you. Nobody reads any of these people. They have like 24 subscribers. And I can't believe you're not taking me seriously. We should have a debate. Like, I don't want to know you. Go away.
Look, Librarian, you better be careful. There are dozens of them. Literally 2 dozen. Right?
Yeah,
That's a very serious movement.
Yeah, they're all asking their mom to heat up a hot pocket they can sacrifice to Odin to curse me or something. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, again, your work on Substack is great. As you said, highly varied topics. So they hold up well and they're fun to do sort of deep dive on. As far as my stuff, Jay Burden Show, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you want to listen to podcasts. If you want the episodes early and ad-free, you'll have to throw me a few bucks. You can do so on Substack, Subscribestar, Patreon, or Gumroad. I think I got that correct for the first time in 2 months. Or you can support us directly, our sponsor, Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching. Again, man, this was a ton of fun. I'll definitely have to have you back on where we can actually talk about what we're supposed to.
Thanks. I was really glad to be here.
Sure thing. And everyone at home, keep your head up. Life can't last forever. Good night.